Hello, welcome to another episode of Field of Screams podcast. Today we will be talking about Friday the 13th Part 3. After Part 2 was a very successful run in the box office, the studio decided to make a third one, of course, we all know that, but they decided to do something a little different this time. Add 3D effects. 3D effects were very popular around this time. You see Amityville Horror, they had a movie that revolved around 3D. It's just a gimmick to get people in the theaters. I'm not really sure why Friday the 13th went to this gimmick so early in the franchise, where the first and second one were great movies that a lot of people came out to see. I guess the cast and crew did not care for the process involving 3D. It was a lot of work. Some of the actors and actresses claimed that it wasn't important how well you acted, but what was important was being able to aim a stick or a yo-yo or some other object towards the screen so that the 3D effect would come in properly. Even when you go back and watch this movie today, the decision to use the 3D didn't age very well, because obviously you're not watching this movie with 3D glasses. So there's just a lot of scenes where bats and sticks and whatever are going right towards the camera. And maybe it would have been cool in theater with 3D glasses, but I'm guessing a lot of people aren't watching this movie today with 3D glasses, so maybe a bad decision. I don't know. The movie really didn't suffer too much for it. It's kind of just goofy. And we all know this franchise has its goofy moments, so that's not a deal breaker. Alright, let's get talking about the actual movie itself. One thing I like about the beginning is the movie does show the aftermath of Part 2, and it does kind of answer the question that I asked last episode about Part 2. Where they see the little dog and Jason jumps through the window. Was it a dream? Was it real? I wasn't sure. But watching back, the little flashback they put in, it shows Jenny and Paul kind of limping out of the barn. Jason's on the ground after being stabbed. So all that we've seen in Part 2, that was a dream. So that question's answered, I guess. After that brief callback, we finally get Jason moving. He's back alive. And he goes and he finds this couple named Harold and Edna. Now Harold, have you ever waken up one night and you're just super hungry and you're just shoving whatever food you can find in your face? That is Harold all the time. And that's why Edna is always grumpy in this movie. She has the stereotypical little curls in her hair and she's screaming at Harold, saying, "You better not be eating," and he's shoving his face with peanuts or fish food. Yes, fish food. And that's all we really know about these characters in the beginning, but they're goofy little characters, and that's a little pinpoint in the Friday the 13th franchise. Where there's a girl just holding up a banana, or Harold shoving his face with food. There's just little goofy, silly characters, and, hey, they're just bodies for Jason to kill, let's be honest. There are easy ways to up the body count. Our final girl in the last film, Jenny, the producers originally intended to have her come back and reprise her role, but she decided to not come back. She wanted to get away from horror for a little bit, try other roles in different movies, and it's kind of a shame, because Jenny, in my opinion, was the best final girl in the Friday the 13th franchise, but I will say the final girl in this film, she does a very good job as well. I don't think she's as good as Jenny, but she's still good. So with Jenny deciding not to come back for this movie, because I guess they had a whole plot and a whole story that was going to continue her arc. But when she declined it, they're like, okay, so we just got to get a brand new group of kids, and here we go again. It's like the same exact movie the third time in a row. And that's probably why they put the 3D effect in, honestly. They're like, well, we don't want it to get repetitive, so we'll do this cool little gimmick, and it'll be cool. It'll be cool. When the kid on the street points his baseball bat towards the camera, people are going to love it. It's going to age greatly. I know, I'm dogging on the 3D. I'm dogging on it. So we have our new final girl, Chris Higgins. We have her love interest. We have Rick, who is a big muscly man who likes to bale hay. Then we have Andy and Debbie. They're a couple that are constantly just fooling around. Then we have the character Vera, who is Debbie's friend. And unfortunately for Vera, Debbie set her up on a blind date with Andy's friend. Andy's friend is Shelly. And oh man, Shelly is a character. I actually enjoy Shelly. Shelly's a character, you're either going to love him or you're going to hate him. There's really no in between. Shelly's just kind of a walking clown who has zero confidence in himself, keeps calling himself fat, and he has the worst pranks in the world. Shelly's lines are so bad that literally Shelly's talking about how he's nervous, and Andy's like, dude, just be yourself, man. Act like yourself. You'll be fine. And Shelly's like, if you were me, would you act like me? And then Andy just kind of stands there and is like, I don't know what to tell you, because that's just how Shelly is. There's another part where the counselors are going skinny dipping, and Shelly's like, well, they're going skinny dipping, but I'm not skinny enough to go skinny dipping. And it's like, what are you going on about, Shelly? Another scene while they're in the truck, Shelly has this big box, and Andy, being his friend, is like, hey, what's in the box? And Shelly's response is, my world. And really all that's in the box is just little gimmicks to where Shelly can pull hijinks later. If Vera and Debbie, if they would have survived this little trip, I doubt Vera would have continued being Debbie's friend for setting her up on this date. I hope Debbie didn't know Shelly before setting this up, because man, she set her up with a character. And I like Shelly, I really do. I don't think this movie would be as good. I wouldn't like this movie as much without Shelly. But yeah, it would suck to be on a date with him. The final two characters that we meet is Chuck and Chili, which it doesn't even feel like they belong in this movie. They're just stoners. That's what they are. They don't do anything else in the movie. They smoke. And when you first meet them, all the other characters are talking and stuff. They get into the van. No, they see smoke in the van. They open up the door, and it's Chuck and Chili smoking, and they're like, ho, 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 ho. And it's like, oh, okay, that's who these two characters are. And that's all they really do until they're killed. That's their role. So this rag team of kids, they go to Camp Crystal Lake, and here we go again. Jason's gonna be back. But when they get there, they get a little surprise. They all go into a room, and soon they find Shelly, stabbed. He falls out. They blood all over him. They're all freaking out, like, oh my gosh, Shelly was killed. And then he starts laughing, and he's like, got him. One of his hijinks, that's his favorite prank, is pretending to be killed. And they all get mad at him, and he's like, oh, come on, guys. And then he looks at his friend, and he's like, I'm such a loser. I don't know. I find it funny. Every time Shelly does this, I crack up. It's so dumb and stupid, but it's fun. So Vera is not impressed by Shelly at all. She goes off on her way. The rest of the characters, they go about their own way. Andy and Debbie, they're flirting around on the camp. And this camp, by the way, the production built it. This wasn't a real camp. And I feel like it kind of gives away of the atmosphere a little bit. I said in the first film, the first couple films, you kind of get these vibes that the camp's haunted, and it's kind of got this grainy look, and I feel like the second one had it as well. But this third one's a lot more cleaned up. They literally built this entire camp. Even the lake you see is not a real lake, it's a production-made lake, so that's kind of disappointing. But when you get a bunch of money, I guess you don't have to settle on a typical campground. You could go somewhere nice and build your own. Anywho, Andy is flirting with Debbie, and he's doing it with this yo-yo, which is, again, the 3D effect. Debbie's laying on the ground. We get the point of view shot of her looking up at Andy, and Andy standing on top of her, letting the yo-yo go down, and he's like, whoa, watch it, and you can hear Debbie's voice going, what are you doing? Stop that, and she's laughing, and it's no way really anyone really acts. If you go up to someone laying on the ground and get a yo-yo and you dangle it from their face within inches over and over again, they'll probably just be like, dude, quit, that's annoying. But in this movie, we gotta get the 3D effects, so that was some of the magic that Andy's working. But also, we see Andy's second passion. He loves to do handstands. He gets on his hands and he walks. That's one of his gimmicks. He likes to do it. I don't know why, but that's important for later in the film, so stay tuned. Our final girl, Chris, gets talking to Rick, and we get a little bit of backstory of her. 2 years ago, she went to this camp, and she says she was attacked by some hideous guy. And when she says hideous guy, we know it's Jason. They even do a flashback, so your imagination doesn't have to do the work, like we're actually seeing it. And she's talking about how he attacked her, and then there's a point to where she gets knocked out. And it very subtly hints at like a motivation that Jason sexually assaulted or raped her. They don't say it, but there's a lot of people that speculate it. It's a theory. It's very weird because no other Jason movie has Jason acting in that way. I mean, Jason's kind of just simple. He just walks around and chops people up and goes on to the next one. But this movie, it's different. They don't say it. The actress who played Chris, she was very religious, and she even had the production company remove a line because that line indicated that her and Rick had had sex before. So she wouldn't have went with that storyline anyways, even if the production company wanted her to say it. So we just get this subtle little thing of that she was attacked by Jason before, and there was just a past, a very haunting past that she has. Then we get our good pal Shelly and Vera. They decided to go by the local gas station to get something. I can't remember what it was. But while they're in there, they run into this group of bikers. And these bikers, they give them a hard time and all this. Well, when they finally decided to leave the store, Shelly accidentally backs into one of their bikes, and one of the bikers is in front of the car, and there's a really goofy exchange between Shelly and the biker. The biker kind of looks down at him and smiles, and Shelly looks surprised, but then Shelly returns the smile like, hey, maybe we're cool. And then the biker punches out all the windows in the car. And it's almost kind of an embarrassing moment for Shelly. But as Shelly's leaving, Shelly's like, no, we're not going to take this. And then he runs over all the bikers' motorcycles. I believe that's what he did. But as they're heading home, Vera's like, wow, that was really impressive of you, Shelly. And Shelly's all proud, like, yeah, I did it. And it was a nice little victory for the character. Now, these three bikers, they get mad by Shelly's antics, so they decided to follow them to the camp. And where the camp's at, I mean, there's this gigantic barn, and the bikers are like, yeah, we're going to sabotage them, we're going to burn this place down, and we're going to steal their gas and do all this stuff. But Jason interrupts that pretty quickly. He kills one of them right away, I think two of them right away, and then he knocks out another one. And that guy doesn't come back till later in the film, of course. So, I mean, really, those bikers, again, they're there for the body count. Well, I guess not just only for the body count. One's there for a distraction. Chris is going to need a distraction later, and he'll give that. After Shelly and Vera return, the characters kind of regroup. I mean, either Rick or Andy, they're really mad because technically that was his car that Shelly was driving that the bikers punched out. But I mean, they all kind of settle down and they get over it. Eventually, Andy and Debbie decide it's time to go fool around, so they go upstairs and they do the deed, which leaves Shelly and Vera kind of in an awkward standoff of, well, what should we do? Shelly, coming off his hot heroic moment, attempts it, and he gets shot down. Vera's like, oh, sorry, I'm not doing that, and she walks out. But Shelly's got to prove a point, right? So Shelly goes into his little magic box, and he gets a hockey mask and a trident. There's no way that trident fit in the box. But he basically sneaks up on Vera and jumps out of the pool in a hockey mask and the trident. And then he's like, oh, see? A girl like you should never walk out alone. Thinking that would somehow sway Vera. And of course she gets mad at him, and Shelly's like, oh man, I messed up again. and he walks off and pouts and goes into a barn. And we don't see it, but I'm guessing once he gets to the barn, Jason basically pulls a Corey Cunningham on Shelly and basically beats him and takes the mask away from him. And Jason's like, hey, this mask is mine now. And Jason keeps that mask forever for the rest of the franchise. So that's how this little lore gets started, because of our man Shelly. So Jason now comes out with the hockey mask, and Vera's like, oh, Shelly, I know it's you. To which Jason's so much bigger than Shelly. There's no way she would think it's Shelly again. I mean, I guess I could see it. I mean, Shelly just had it on. He was being stupid. Then someone else comes up with the same hockey mask. You'd probably mistake him. But I mean, Jason just looks so much more different than Shelly. Shelly's hair is like poofing out behind the mask. Jason's bald. You would think she would just notice the difference. Because of Vera's lack of attention to detail, Jason then harpoons her in the eye. So Vera's gone. Shelly's almost gone. We see him a little bit later with the stoners. But I mean, Shelly's basically dead. So now we cut to Andy and Debbie. They're fooling around. They get done fooling around. And when they're done, Debbie does a sensible thing and takes a shower. What does Andy do? You guessed it. He sneaks up on Debbie, doing a handstand. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why that was such a big point for this character, but he loves handstands. So Andy's naked, doing handstands, and he kind of goes up to Debbie, and he's like, hey, check it out. And she's like, Andy, I'm trying to shower. So instead of going back down on 2 feet and walking out, Andy walks out on his hands because he's the handstand master. And while he walks out on his hands, Jason meets him in the hallway and chops him in half. It was pretty cool. Debbie then decides to read something, and she later spots Andy. And there's a cool little scene of like where his body's like up in the rafter. But I mean, anyways, Debbie gets the Kevin Bacon death, which is again repeated for the 3rd time. I mean, in 2, at least it was a double harpoon attack. This one is just the standard Kevin Bacon. She's laying on like a hammock, and Jason goes underneath and shoves a knife or something sharp through her chest. So she gets Kevin Baconed. At this point, you probably think that all the side characters are dead except Chris and Rick. But if you're like me, you forgot about Cheech and Chong. Oops. I mean Chuck and Chili. Yes, our stoners who really have no point in this movie except for Jason to kill, which is what comes next. Chuck and Chili, they're like making popcorn and probably like smoking and stuff, and Jason eventually comes along. He throws Chuck into an electric generator, kills him off. Chili does walk through and finds Shelly, who has his throat slit and he's like dying slowly. But Shelly's already done like the death gimmick like 12 times on this trip. So she's just like, oh, silly Shelly, and just walks past him. Eventually she finds out that they are dying, and so she starts to go into hysterics and starts to try to run away, but her acting's so bad that like the movie score is like playing it at 12 out of 10. Like the score is just blaring while she's screaming and yelling, because it's the ultimate B acting. But yeah, Jason eventually catches Chili, no surprise there. She's not going to be our final girl. So now we're down to Rick and Chris. Rick ends up getting a really cool death. Jason sneaks up behind him and just crushes his head with his bare hands. Yeah, Rick's head during this scene looks like a papier-mâché project made by a 7th grader, but it's still cool. The eye shoots out towards the camera. I mean, it's a great death. It really is. So now we just have Chris. And of course the chase scene starts, and it's a good chase scene. I mean, I talked on the last episode about how Jenny fought off Jason with a chainsaw and was doing all these things, and Chris is doing her version of it. She finds a knife at one point, swings it at Jason. Jason has to backpedal to avoid the knife. But eventually we get this showdown in the barn. And that's where the peak of the chase scene goes and where the conflict is. So Jason basically, she's hiding. Jason's throwing everything around the barn like a mad child. And then Chris hops down. She lands a few on him. Basically traps him to where she gets a rope around his neck and knocks him off an edge to where a normal human being would be hung. They would have died, right? So she climbs up there to look at him. She sees him hanging. And it's honestly a really cool scene. Jason uses his upper body strength to pull himself up. And then he kind of teases her by lifting up the mask to show her his face. And he's smiling while he's doing it. And it's just like kind of a callback to the previous horror that Chris had experienced. So, I mean, like, this whole fight here, like, it's Chris kind of overcoming her past. You know, this guy who violated her. It's not just Jason. It's a guy who violated her. So, you know, they start going at it again. He's chasing her. And then that final biker pops out to be that nice little surprise that delays Jason just long enough to where Christy can put an axe through his head. And when she hits him with the axe, it gets him right in the hockey mask. And it's cool because there's a little indent on the hockey mask in all the future films. So when you watch one ahead of 3, you will always notice just a chip on the hockey mask right on top. And that's from Chris. She left her mark on him. Of course, we can't end it here. Chris has to get on a canoe and float down Crystal Lake. And by this point, you know a jump scare is coming. I mean, first one, it's great. Second one, fantastic. But, you know, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice. Hey, I can't believe you got me. Fool me 3 times, shame on me. So you should be expecting it at this point. So Chris is floating down Camp Crystal Lake. She sees this house or cabin, and you see Jason in there without his mask. And he's like smiling in the window, and it's actually a pretty creepy scene. There's suspenseful music. He's like sprinting down the stairs. Chris is trying to steer the paddle away. She can't. But then when she looks up, she realizes it was all just a mirage. You know, it was in her head. So Chris just kind of looks around. She's like, oh, thank goodness. My mind was just playing tricks on me. And then a decomposed Pamela Voorhees rises from the lake and drags Chris in, to which again is just a dream. Then we cut to Chris being carried out and put into a car. She's talking to herself, and by this point you know she's gone crazy. And that's the end of the film. So overall, pretty solid movie. I like 2 a little better. It's scarier, but the third one's funnier. So it kind of just depends on where your cup of tea is. I mean, third one has a lot more cornier, goofier characters compared to the second one, to where it's like more darker, looks a little more grainier. And in my opinion, it's scarier. I think Baghead Jason's a little more scary than Hockey Mask Jason. But I mean, everyone knows Hockey Mask Jason. That's the iconic look. So that's that. And I mean, the third one is where that started. So it is an important movie in the franchise. It's a good movie. So, I mean, next we're going to have part 4. Can't wait to take that on. If you've made it this far in the episode, please give this episode a like. And please subscribe so you know when the other Friday the 13th reviews come out. Again, thank you for listening, and until next time.